At 48, I found myself in my sleek Manhattan office, gazing out over the bustling city streets below. The company had made me a jaw-dropping offer, $24 million. It was a sum that could change anyone's life, but I felt hollow inside. Despite my professional success, my personal life was in shambles. My name is Jim Collins. I grew up in a blue-collar family in a small town, always feeling like the odd one out. High school was a nightmare. I was disinterested and rebellious. My guidance counselor once suggested I drop out and find work, saying I was a troublemaker. Somehow, I managed to scrape through graduation, probably more of a relief for the teachers than for me. With the onset of the Desert Storm, I enlisted in the Marines, looking for a way out of my stagnant life. My dad, who worked in a steel mill, thought it might whip me into shape and give me some direction. To my own surprise, I thrived in the disciplined environment of boot camp. The physical and mental challenges invigorated me, and I quickly rose to the top of my class. This led me to volunteer for specialized recon training, a tough 8-week program at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, designed to prepare us for the Gulf. I wasn't particularly large, standing just under 6 feet and weighing in at 170 pounds, but I kept fit through swimming and running. The training sharpened my physical abilities and taught me vital survival skills. Soon I found myself deployed in the Middle East, where reality hit hard. I spent over a year in the desert until a roadside bomb exploded near our convoy, leaving me with shrapnel wounds to my spine and bladder. After a long recovery in a veterans hospital, I was honorably discharged. Luckily, the injuries didn't leave me incontinent, and my limp is now barely noticeable. The realization that I couldn't have children didn't hit me right away, but became a significant burden as time passed. Returning home at 20, I felt lost. The military had been my only structure, and now, without any marketable skills, I was back to square one. My dad discovered a VA program at Boston University that offered career counseling for veterans. After a full day of aptitude tests, Dr. Green recommended I pursue a degree in computer science, citing my analytical strengths, even though my high school record was abysmal. He convinced me I had what it took to succeed in college. So I enrolled at BU, majoring in computer science, much to my parents' astonishment. Around that time, an old friend, Steve Robertson, reached out. "Jim, it is Steve. I am finally out of the Marines. Steve, it is great to hear from you. What happened? Where are you? How'd you get my number?" I was eager to reconnect. I got hit by a sniper. They had to amputate my leg, but the prosthetic works great. I called your folks and got your number. I am in Seattle now, studying environmental science at the University of Washington. I am going to be a researcher, Jim. I chuckled, remembering our old days. That is awesome, Steve. I am really happy for you. My folks must be told you I am studying computer science here. Yeah, I heard. Can you believe it? Us becoming professionals, you in tech and me in research? We laughed and promised to stay in touch. Not wanting to commute from home, I used my GI Bill benefits, a small disability pension, and some savings to rent a modest apartment near campus. It had a tiny bedroom, a living area, a kitchenette, and a cramped bathroom. But it was perfect for a student like me. I set up a study nook with a cheap desk and an old laptop, diving headfirst into my studies, fully aware that my future depended on it. I walked to class and took the T to visit my family. The first 2 years flew by, and I was surprised at how well I did in my exams. I was determined to make something of myself, which meant sacrificing much of my social life. I made a few friends, and we'd occasionally grab a beer or pizza. One Friday, my classmate Dave invited me to a house party at Harvard. I decided to go, and that night my life took an unexpected turn. I met Claire, who seemed every bit the sophisticated city girl with her designer clothes and pearl earrings. At first, I was put off by her polished appearance, but she sensed my unease and tried to make me feel comfortable. After grabbing a drink, we ended up talking for hours. As our relationship grew, the topic of marriage came up, and I was anxious about how Claire would react to my infertility. One day she confided, "Jim, I love you and want to spend my life with you, but I don't want children. I don't think I'd be a good mother." Tears welled up in her eyes. If that is a deal breaker, I'll understand if you want to end things. I hugged her tightly. Claire, if you don't want kids, then neither do I. My sterility was suddenly a non-issue, and I didn't even have to bring it up. Ironically, Claire wasn't too strict about taking her birth control pills, often missing days. It never caused any issues, which only reinforced her belief that a few missed pills didn't matter. For us, it didn't. Jim, Claire said one sunny afternoon, I think it's his time you met my parents. They've been asking about you. I knew this day was coming, but I was filled with dread. I felt like an imposter, convinced they'd see right through me. The meeting was set for Sunday. I learned that Claire S. family was part of the City S. elite. Her father, Richard Beaumont, owned a prestigious law firm, and her mother, Sylvia, was a well-known philanthropist. I felt completely out of my league. Her dad sent a chauffeur-driven sedan to pick us up. I was a bundle of nerves, but Claire kept reassuring me. We arrived at their stately mansion in the suburbs, an elegant colonial-style home surrounded by manicured gardens. Claire led me inside, calling out for her parents. To my surprise, they were incredibly warm and made me feel at home. Richard's wife, Susan, was polite but seemed a bit reserved. She was around 55, with silver hair and a keen, thoughtful gaze. She looked younger than her age, perhaps in her mid-40s. If Claire aged as gracefully, I thought, I'd be a lucky man. Richard, on the other hand, insisted I call him by his first name, despite his stature and wealth. He was tall, exuded authority, and was obviously quite affluent, but he seemed genuinely interested in me and my background. As we were leaving, he said, Jim, I'm impressed with you. Keep up your studies. I can always use a bright mind in tech. He laughed and gave me a firm pat on the back, telling Claire, You've got a good one here. On the way back, Claire cuddled up to me, relieved that the meeting had gone well. I sighed, glad it was over, but now I had to think about Claire meeting my folks. The contrast between her family's sprawling estate and my parents' small house in Queens would be striking, but I knew my parents would welcome her warmly. Claire's visit to my parents' home went smoothly. She was gracious about their modest lifestyle and handled the situation with grace. Occasionally, I saw a flash of something in her eyes that made me uneasy, but she never let it show in her behavior. She and my mom hit it off in the kitchen, chatting over a family lasagna recipe, even though I wasn't too sure Claire had ever cooked anything herself. My dad took me aside and said, Jim, Claire is great, but she is used to a different standard of living. A tech job pays well, but it might not meet her expectations. Just keep that in mind. He patted my shoulder, and we rejoined the others. Later in the living room, my dad brought out a bottle of wine and made a surprising announcement. Jim, Claire, to your future happiness. May your life together be long and joyful. And by the way, we've decided to sell the house and move to Arizona. We bought a small ranch there, and I've got a part-time gig lined up. We are tired of the cold and moving at the end of the month. Cheers! I was taken aback, but happy for them, joking that they'd better keep a guest room ready for our visits. I noticed a look in Claire's eyes, but brushed it off. Claire suggested pooling our resources to find a better place to live. Her parents were willing to help, and we found a modern loft apartment near the university. Claire insisted on getting a car, so her dad bought her a sleek Audi. Our final year of college was hectic. Claire was engrossed in her studies and wedding preparations, while I focused on keeping my grades up. As a result, we spent less time together. 2 months before graduation, Claire came home beaming with excitement. Jim, I landed a part-time job starting next week. If all goes well, it could turn into a full-time position after graduation. She was elated. She'd be working as a junior editor at a prominent publishing house downtown. I couldn't help but voice my concerns. Claire, we barely see each other now. Won't this job make it even harder? I know, but it's a fantastic opportunity. Please be happy for me, she implored. I mustered a smile and reassured her. You'll be amazing, sweetheart. They're lucky to have you. She danced around the apartment, but I couldn't shake a sense of unease. It turned out to be manageable. Claire's new job mostly involved evening shifts when I had late classes, so our schedules didn't clash too much. Before we knew it, our wedding day arrived. The ceremony took place in a lavish hotel with over 200 guests in attendance, mostly Claire's family and friends. I felt like I was floating through the day, overwhelmed by the whirlwind of events. That evening, Richard pulled me aside into a private room. "Jim, I know you've been sending out applications, but I'd like you to consider working with me. I need to expand my tech team, and I want you to train with Donna, our lead developer. This isn't just a job, it is a chance for growth, and I'll offer you a salary better than what you'd find elsewhere." He grinned, and I realized this was a serious offer. We shook hands, agreeing that Claire and I would maintain our independence while taking this opportunity. My parents gave us a beautiful set of crystal glassware as a wedding gift, which must have been a significant expense for them. Claire's parents gifted us a luxurious honeymoon in Hawaii, and while I felt uneasy about their generosity, I didn't want to decline. I started feeling uncomfortable with how involved the Beaumonts were in our lives. Claire and I had discussed wanting to be self-reliant, but she seemed unbothered by her parents' influence. Our first big disagreement came when deciding where to live after the wedding. Claire wanted to buy a high-end condo in the city, close to her new job and Richard's office. I insisted on renting something affordable until we could save up enough to buy a place ourselves. Claire was upset that I wouldn't accept financial help from her parents. I stood my ground, emphasizing the importance of us making it on our own. Reluctantly, she agreed. We found a charming two-bedroom apartment that was within our budget and conveniently located near public transport. We stretched our finances to furnish the place, but I kept a tight grip on the budget, ensuring we stayed within our means. Richard's job offer was challenging but rewarding. I worked closely with Donna, an experienced developer who mentored me through the transition from college to real-world applications. I quickly learned that school was just the beginning. The real learning happened on the job. I often stayed late, eager to soak up as much knowledge as possible. Claire was equally committed to her career, quickly moving up the ranks from junior editor to a full-fledged editor in less than 2 years. She earned a good salary, and we started putting money aside for our future home. Despite our progress, Claire still dreamed of living in a luxury condo downtown. Claire often criticized our apartment, calling it cramped and inadequate. Her attitude began to strain our relationship. I stayed in touch with Mike Thompson, who kept urging me to move to Seattle, but I was content where I was, and I knew Claire wouldn't want to relocate. Mike was persistent, but I had to laugh at his enthusiasm. One Friday evening, I had planned a special celebration for our second wedding anniversary. I reserved a table at an upscale restaurant, had 24 roses arranged in a crystal vase, and bought a pair of diamond earrings for Claire. I bet she thought I had forgotten, as she hadn't mentioned the anniversary at all. Just as I was setting everything up, the phone rang. "Jim," Claire said, "I'm really sorry, but I'll be late tonight. We have a ton of work to finish up on Jonathan's new book, and I'll be here for a few more hours. I'll grab something to eat and see you around 10. She hung up before I could respond. I glanced at the roses and the velvet box, wondering if she even remembered what day it was. Her job seemed to be her top priority, and we had both been so engrossed in our work that we were neglecting our marriage. It felt like we were just roommates. Claire had been completely absorbed in the launch of Jonathan Gray's latest book. She was excited, but I was growing tired of hearing about him. I had met him at a book launch months ago and found him arrogant. Claire wore a revealing black dress that night, making me uncomfortable. When she introduced me to Jonathan, he tried to intimidate me with a firm handshake, but I matched his grip. He sneered and called me the tech guy, laughing dismissively. Claire looked embarrassed and spent the rest of the evening at his side while he kept throwing condescending glances my way. A week later, Claire stopped talking about Jonathan and the project altogether. Whenever I brought him up, she changed the subject. I started feeling suspicious and paranoid but tried to brush it off. Our marriage was on autopilot, and Claire was increasingly distant. We hadn't been intimate in weeks. A week before our anniversary, I decided to surprise Claire at work and take her out for dinner. I went to Apex Publishing and accidentally got off on the executive floor, where I bumped into Robert Sinclair, the VP. "Jim, good to see you. It's been a while," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Hey, Robert, I got off on the wrong floor. I'm here to take my wife to dinner. Hopefully, she's not too busy with the Gray book launch." "Oh no, that is all wrapped up. Jonathan S. still in the VIP suite upstairs, but the book S at the printer. Go grab Claire. She deserves a good meal." He smiled and walked away. I went to Claire S.'s office and saw her in the hallway. She looked startled. "Jim, what are you doing here?" she blurted out. "Hi, Claire. I thought we could have dinner out tonight. It's been a while, and I thought we could spend some time together." I saw a flash of annoyance in her eyes. "I can tea, Jim. I am busy with Jonathan S. book. Please be patient. This will be over soon, I promise. I'll try to get home earlier tonight." She patted my cheek and walked back into her office. I left, realizing it was almost 11 p.m. Claire's promise to be home by 10 had been as hollow as the others. I threw the roses, vase and all, into the trash and tossed the earrings into my desk drawer. I went to bed but couldn't sleep, my mind racing with suspicions that she was having an affair with Jonathan. When she came home around 1 a.m., freshly showered, I pretended to be asleep. Her behavior only confirmed my fears. The next morning, I went to the office to clear my head. I knew my marriage was in trouble and felt the need to find out the truth. I found a private investigation firm near my workplace and set up an appointment with Marge Davis, the head investigator. Marge listened to my concerns and explained the challenges of obtaining legal evidence from a high-security building like Apex SVIP Suite. "Marge, I don't care about the legalities, I just need confirmation," I insisted. She looked at me with sympathy. "Okay, Jim, we'll see what we can do. Here's our fee schedule and contract. Sign it and send it back with a check, and we'll start on Monday." I nodded, shook her hand, and left, feeling somewhat relieved for taking action. When I got home, Claire was in the kitchen, visibly upset. "Damn it, Jim, where did you go? Do you remember what today is? Did you even get me a card or do anything special?" She was clearly trying to shift the blame. "Claire," I replied calmly, "today is the 12th. Our anniversary was yesterday. The roses I got you are in the trash. I canceled our dinner reservations. If you check my desk, you'll find the gift I got you. Clearly, last night was more important, considering you stayed out until almost 1 a.m. She looked shocked, her eyes darting around, avoiding mine. She tried to compose herself. "I am sorry, Jim," she said, sitting down on the sofa. "I don't know what's going on anymore. This project has me so stressed out. It is over, Jim. The campaign is finally over. Let us try to forget the last few months and work on our marriage." She didn't realize that I knew the project had ended long ago. Her guilt was palpable. I didn't push the issue, but the tension between us was thick. That week, Claire was home every evening by 5 p.m., suggesting her affair with Jonathan had ended, but it was too late for me. The trust was gone and our marriage felt like a facade. A few days later, Mike called again. "Jim, have you thought any more about moving out here? There are so many opportunities and we could use a good tech guy." Mike had been persistent, trying to convince me to make a fresh start. Mike had been suggesting a move to Seattle for a while. "It's something to think about," I said, unsure but open to the idea. A few days later, Marge Davis called me back to her office. "Jim, I have some updates, but they might not be what you were hoping for. We couldn't find any concrete evidence to support your suspicions, so we're refunding part of your fee. However, our background check on Jonathan Gray revealed he is a notorious womanizer, with several harassment complaints and 2 messy divorces. I'm sorry we couldn't do more." I felt a mix of disappointment and resignation. I called John Kramer, a divorce attorney, and set up an appointment for 10 days later. It was time to end this chapter of my life. Meanwhile, Claire and I tiptoed around each other, the tension palpable. A couple of days before my appointment, Claire rushed into the house, visibly agitated. "Jim, sit down. I need to tell you something." Her voice was shaky. "I know we didn't plan for kids, but I am pregnant. We're going to be parents, Jim. Please don't be angry. Please be happy for us." Her eyes were wide with anxiety. I was completely blindsided, struggling to process what she was saying. Then it hit me, the absurdity of it all. Claire had always been careless with her birth control, and now she was trying to convince me that the child was mine. I felt a wave of anger and devastation. She had betrayed me, and now she was expecting me to believe this lie. "I'll pack a few things and leave. I'll get the rest later when you're not here," I said, my voice cold and detached. Claire's face crumpled and she started to cry. "I'm sorry, Jim. You don't know how sorry I am." "Why, Claire, was our marriage so unimportant to you?" I asked, my voice softer now. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. I asked myself that too. Maybe it was the excitement, the allure of it all. I have no excuses. I was weak and foolish. I let myself get swept up by Jonathan and the job. I didn't realize how far gone I was until it was too late. She sobbed, looking utterly defeated. "Lying to you about the baby was despicable. I am truly sorry." "Is there any way?" Her voice trailed off, already knowing the answer. "No," I said firmly. "I have an appointment with John Kramer. Get a lawyer. We'll split our assets and finalize the divorce without making things complicated." I packed a bag and left, leaving Claire still crying on the sofa. Telling Richard and Susan Beaumont about the situation was one of the hardest things I have ever done. "Why, Jim? Why are you doing this? Haven't we treated you well?" "You are like a son to us," Richard said, his eyes welling with tears. "Richard, I can go into details, but Claire will explain. She left me no choice. You've been like a second family to me, and I am grateful, but I can say more," I replied, struggling to keep my emotions in check. Richard seemed to understand, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Okay, Jim, do what you have to do. Just promise me you will let us help you if you ever need anything," he said, and I nodded, leaving the house with a heavy heart. I spent the next week at a Hilton, trying to come to terms with everything. I filed for divorce, knowing Claire wouldn't contest it. Realizing there was nothing left for me in New York, I called Mike and was on a plane to Seattle within a week. Mike had already submitted my resume to his company, and I started the job a few days after arriving. I stayed with Mike and his wife Rachel for a couple of weeks until I found an apartment near work. Rachel, whom I had only spoken to on the phone before, was warm and welcoming. She made me feel more than just a guest in their home. She was around 53 with dark hair and kind brown eyes. She became a good friend, and I was genuinely happy for both her and Mike. As weeks passed, I threw myself into work, grateful for the distraction. But the nights were tough, filled with restless sleep and dark memories of Claire. Sometimes I drank too much, letting my anger out by smashing things before passing out on the couch. I missed the Claire I had married, not the one who had betrayed me. I often wondered if her infidelity was partly my fault, but I couldn't bring myself to forgive her or accept the child. Mike and Rachel were my lifeline, inviting me to spend weekends at their place, go camping, or set me up on blind dates, which I mostly avoided. I spent many weekends with them, finding some peace by their pool. Richard and Susan Beaumont also called occasionally, never mentioning Claire, just checking in, which touched me deeply. Things started to get a bit awkward at Mike and Rachel S. They were like family, but Rachel S. bikinis seemed to get skimpier, and there were a few uncomfortable moments. One Saturday, Mike went to get some drinks, insisting I stay behind. I came out of the bathroom and found Rachel in a short silk robe, open to reveal nothing underneath. She took my hand and led me to the patio. "Rachel, you should cover up. Mike will be back soon," I stammered, feeling my face flush. She ignored me and sat across from me, her robe still open. "Jim, stop feeling sorry for yourself. You are not the only guy who's been hurt. You can avoid women forever." I blushed, panicking as she stood up, letting the robe fall. She took my hand again. "Don't worry, Jim, I'm not going to sleep with you. Mike and I thought this might snap you out of your funk." She tied the robe back on. "We did this out of love and concern for you." "Jesus, Rachel, what's Mike going to think about this?" I asked, worried. Rachel smiled reassuringly. "Don't worry, Jim. Mike knows exactly what I was planning to do, and he is okay with it. He trusts you with his life, and he trusts me too. We just wanted to help you move on." Mike thought that getting me back into the dating scene might help lift my spirits. When he returned later, he was grinning, and his good humor eased some of my guilt. To keep up appearances and maybe to shake off the lingering sadness, I started accepting the blind dates they set up for me. Surprisingly, many of the women were kind and interesting, and I enjoyed the evenings out, even though I knew nothing serious would come of it. I still loved Claire deeply and missed her terribly. Letting go of that love was my biggest hurdle. What kept me grounded was the constant support from Mike and Rachel. They kept inviting me over, encouraging me to get out more, and spending weekends by their pool helped me relax. Richard and Susan Beaumont also kept in touch, showing genuine concern, which helped me start to move on. I joined a local health club, signed up for a cooking class, and even thought about joining a book club. Mike and Rachel were thrilled to see me getting back into the swing of things. I kept busy with work and occasional dates, slowly recovering from the breakup with Claire. 2 years passed since I moved to the West Coast. I was going through the motions, still feeling a bit detached from everything. Then my world shifted again. One Thursday evening, my mom called, her voice choked with tears. My dad had suffered a massive stroke and passed away. I felt lightheaded but knew I had to stay strong. I called Mike immediately. "Mike, my dad had a massive stroke. He is gone. Can you help me arrange a leave of absence?" "Of course, Jim. Don't worry about anything here. Just focus on your family," Mike responded sympathetically. I packed quickly and caught a flight to Tampa a few hours later. I landed early the next morning and rented a car to drive to my parents' house. There I found a note from Mrs. Simmons, the neighbor, asking me to call her. "Mrs. Simmons, this is Jim Collins. I just got your note," I said when she answered. She interrupted, "Jim, your mom had a heart attack and was rushed to the hospital. She is stable now, so try to stay calm. I'll come over in 5 minutes." When Mrs. Simmons' Katie arrived, she filled me in on everything. My mom had experienced neck and arm pain, and Katie had called 911. Mom was taken to the ER, examined, and scheduled for bypass surgery later that week. I was about to rush out the door when Katie stopped me, speaking calmly. "Jim, wait for me. Give me 15 minutes to get ready, and I'll go with you. It's better than giving you directions." I paused, feeling relieved as she hugged me. "Don't worry, Jim. Your mom is going to be okay. She's only 56 and has many good years left," Katie reassured me. "Thanks, Katie." "I appreciate your help," I said, grateful for her support. We got to the hospital, and I finally saw my mom. She was in shock from my dad's sudden passing and was apprehensive about the surgery. I convinced her that she needed to go through with it for my sake, and she agreed. Mom had the surgery 5 days later and recovered quickly. Within a week, she was back home, and we were taking short walks together. During her hospital stay, I arranged my dad's funeral. The turnout was large, with many friends and neighbors in shock at his passing at just 60. I insisted that Mom not attend due to her recent surgery, promising that we would visit his grave together when she felt stronger. As I stayed with my mom, I began to think about my future. I felt a reluctance to leave her alone, especially after losing Dad. After discussing it with Mike and Rachel, I decided to quit my job and move closer to her. Mike helped me arrange for a moving company to pack and ship my belongings, including my car. Their support was invaluable. Mom's recovery was impressive, though she still needed to rest in the afternoons. With Katie's help, she too had recently lost her husband. Mom was doing well. I decided it was time to start looking for a new job. When I discussed my plans with Mom, she suggested we pool our resources and start a business together. "I believe in you, Jim. We could be partners. I can handle the office work, and you can focus on the technical side," she proposed. I was surprised, but intrigued by the idea. There was potential, especially with small contractors needing engineering services. I consulted with Mike, who encouraged me to go for it. Mom and I pooled our money and opened a small office. I advertised in local trade publications and introduced myself to contractors. Slowly, work started to come in. Within a few months, we were covering our expenses, though we weren't making a profit yet. Then, unexpectedly, we received a bid request for a mid-size office building. I worked tirelessly on the bid, minimizing the profit margin, and won the contract. We had to expand quickly to meet the project's demands, but it was a good problem to have. Soon, more work followed, and I expanded 3 more times over the next few years, eventually occupying an entire floor in a new high-rise. I knew I was lucky to catch a building boom at the right time. The first couple of years were intense, focused on building the business and leaving little room for social life. After about 3 years, I finally had enough staff to cut back on hours, rejoin the gym, and even attempt cooking again, though I was still terrible at it. Thankfully, Mom helped out with that. At the gym, I met Mary Susan Black. She was around 55, fit, and close to my age. One day I noticed her workout attire was fraying, a detail that caught my attention. I awkwardly approached her, trying to warn her without causing embarrassment. Excuse me," I stammered. "I don't mean to be, I mean—" She laughed softly, easing the tension. "You are really not good at this, are you? Maybe you should practice before introducing yourself to someone," she teased, making the situation less awkward. I whispered to her about her workout outfit, and she quickly ran to the locker room. I couldn't get her out of my mind, and when she didn't show up for a week, I assumed she was too embarrassed to return. But the following week, she approached me. "Hi," she said, extending her hand. "I am Mary Black. Thank you for the heads up last time." I smiled, relieved. "You are welcome. I am Jim Collins. Would you like to grab lunch today?" She agreed, and we started getting to know each other over the next few weeks. Mary was 28, divorced, and had a 3-year-old daughter named Stacy. She worked in public relations for an advertising firm near the gym. After our third date, I met Stacy, a charming little girl with blonde hair and blue eyes, quite different from her mother. Stacy quickly warmed up to me, surprising Mary, who said her daughter usually didn't take to strangers so easily. Dating Mary became even more enjoyable because of Stacy. I liked Mary a lot, but it wasn't the deep love I had felt for Claire. It wasn't fair to compare the two relationships, but I knew I had changed as well. Mary was dynamic and had a strong personality. She was sweet and kind, especially with Stacy, whom I grew to adore as if she were my own. Our relationship was comfortable but not overly physical, just some kissing and light affection. One night at Mary's condo, after dinner and a bit of wine, she suddenly became very forward. We ended up having a wild night together, and the next morning, Mary explained that the wine had lowered her inhibitions and she had wanted to be closer. I reassured her that everything was perfect. We continued dating for several months, becoming very comfortable with each other. I introduced Mary and Stacy to my mom, who had since retired. Mom adored Stacy, treating her like a grandchild, and Stacy quickly took to calling her Nana. It felt like everything was falling into place. We never discussed love or the future, content with how things were. Eventually, we decided it was silly to keep shuttling between our places, so I bought a house in a gated golf course community, and we moved in together 2 months later. Marriage never came up. Both of us had experienced bad endings in our previous marriages, and we were happy without that formality. Stacy began calling me Daddy, and I felt a deep connection with her, like a true father. Life was good and the years passed swiftly. My company thrived, gaining a great reputation, and I had a strong team that kept it growing. I no longer had to worry about keeping the business afloat. I stayed in touch with Richard and Susan Beaumont, talking a couple of times a year, and always kept up with Mike and Rachel. Mary was doing well in her career too, climbing the corporate ladder to become the Director of Public Relations. However, as she advanced, her hours increased and she traveled more frequently. Usually she was home around the same time as me, though sometimes she was late. Stacy grew into a beautiful, kind, and intelligent young woman, now almost 20 and finishing her sophomore year at an Ivy League university. Everything seemed perfect until things started to change. Over the past few months, Mary seemed distant, apathetic, and preoccupied. I thought it might be my imagination, but our intimacy had noticeably declined. We used to be close a few times a week, but it had been almost 2 weeks since we last made love. Mary often said she was tired or not feeling well. I began to fear that history might be repeating itself. One night after dinner, I decided to confront her. "Mary," I began, "we need to talk. I feel like something is off between us. You seem distant, like you've forgotten I am here. What's going on?" I tried to keep my tone gentle, not wanting to sound accusatory. She stared at me, taken aback. "What the hell are you talking about, Jim? Are you accusing me of something? Are you getting paranoid?" she snapped, storming out and slamming the bedroom door. I was stunned. Mary had never spoken to me like that before. I realized that there had been a growing tone of disrespect, maybe even contempt from her, that I hadn't fully noticed until now. I decided I needed to find out what was happening, just as I had done years ago. I slept in the guest room that night. The next morning Mary emerged, her eyes red and tearful. She apologized profusely, and we made up, promising not to let things escalate again. Mary blamed the tension on job stress, claiming a big client was threatening to leave. I didn't fully believe her and decided to investigate further. Mary's late nights and increased travel had become more frequent, and I suspected there was more to it than work. I contacted a private investigator, explained my concerns, and provided the necessary details along with a hefty retainer. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere at home remained strained. We avoided arguing, but there was a palpable tension between us. I anxiously awaited the investigator's report, already fearing the worst. When the report came, it confirmed my suspicions. Mary had been meeting with a man named Howard Branch, a 48-year-old divorced businessman. They met at restaurants, held hands, kissed, and checked into hotels together. She also met him during her business trips. I was hurt, but not as devastated as I had been with Claire. I realized that I wasn't strong enough to endure another betrayal like this. I consulted my attorney, thinking a separation would be straightforward since we weren't legally married. He warned it could still be complicated and advised seeking a mutual agreement to avoid court battles. The following Friday after dinner, I confronted Mary. "How long have you been seeing him?" I asked softly. Mary looked shocked and teary-eyed. "I'm sorry, Jim. I hoped you wouldn't find out," she said, tears streaming down her face. "How long, Mary? I know his name, Howard Branch. Do you love him?" I pressed, trying to keep my composure. She lowered her head, sobbing. "About 8 months. I saw him at the mall. He is my ex-husband, Stacy's biological father. It felt like a knife to my chest. Stacy's father? No, I am Stacy's father," I exploded. "No one will take that away from me." Mary cowered, crying. "You are Stacy's father," she whispered. "I just meant biologically." "Do you love him?" I demanded, struggling to stay calm. "I don't know," she wailed. "It was a mistake, but I couldn't say no to him. It felt like when we first met and married. I couldn't keep away from him." She was crying hysterically, gasping for breath and looking a mess. I handed her some tissues, feeling deflated and sorry for her. My anger dissipated, replaced by a deep disappointment. Mary wasn't the same person anymore, and I felt like I was back at square one, dealing with another failed relationship. Despite not being the love of my life, her betrayal hurt deeply. "I'll be sleeping in the guest room tonight," I told her. "Please move out as soon as you can. We'll tell people we drifted apart like my mom and Stacy." As I left the room, I felt much older than I was. The next morning, I went to work, trying to focus, but it was tough. When I returned, Mary was gone. She had taken most of her things, but left a letter. "Dearest Jim, I am deeply sorry for the pain I've caused. You did nothing to deserve my shameful behavior. I don't understand my attraction to Howard. I know he'll ruin me. I vowed never to see him again, but I'm unsure if I can keep that promise. You have been kind and loving, and none of this is your fault. I've come to love you, which makes my actions even more unforgivable. Please don't hate me. All my love, Mary." I collapsed into a chair, the letter slipping from my hand. I knew I would miss Mary, but I also felt a sense of relief. I needed time alone to clear my head. Then a thought struck me. I needed to confront Howard Branch for Mary's sake and my own. I had his address and was determined to face him. That night, I changed into casual clothes and drove to his rundown apartment building. When he opened the door, I pushed him off balance and stepped inside, closing the door behind me. He yelled, "I am going to tear you apart." But 5 seconds later, he was on the floor, moaning in pain. I pulled him into a sitting position and spoke slowly and clearly. "Listen carefully, Howard. My name is Jim Collins, and Mary's last name is Black. Got it?" I slapped him, and he nodded quickly. "Good," I continued. I'm going to show you pain, but I want to leave many marks. For the next 20 minutes, I methodically inflicted pain until he vomited twice and begged me to stop. I got a glass of water, threw it in his face, then let him drink. I grabbed his face and said, "Pack your things and leave this area, the Southeast, the whole region. Try California, Oregon, or Washington. If you are still here 24 hours from now, you'll end up in a wheelchair for life. Do you understand?" He nodded vigorously, terrified. I drove home and showered for half an hour, feeling sick about what I had done. I tried to rationalize it as helping Mary by freeing her from Howard's influence, but deep down, I knew it was partly revenge. The next day, Howard Branch was gone. Talking with my mom and then Stacy was tough. They couldn't understand, and I refused to go into detail. Stacy threatened to fly home, but both Mary and I convinced her to stay at school and finish her semester. I suspected Mary eventually told Stacy what had happened because during our next conversation she seemed subdued and sad. "I'll always love you, Dad," she said, which warmed my heart. Days turned into weeks, and I continued to go through the motions of life. I had to decide whether to sell the company or not. The potential buyer was patient, but had set a deadline that was fast approaching. I felt torn. Selling would free me from the responsibility, but the business was the only thing giving my life purpose. What would I do if I sold it? So I procrastinated. Finally, a week before the deadline, I called the buyer and canceled the sale. I decided to keep the company. Weeks turned into months, and I found myself reflecting on my life as I neared my 50th birthday. What did I have to show for it? A successful company and a daughter who, while not biologically mine, was a bright spot in my life. Stacy called every week without fail, and I settled into a solitary existence. Did I miss Mary? Sometimes, but it felt more like missing Mike and Rachel. We had good times together, but life moved on. The last I heard, Mary was doing well in her job and dating again. I wasn't particularly bothered by being alone. I had gotten used to it. "Jim," I heard Gail, my secretary, on the intercom. "You have a visitor." I was deep in thought, reviewing specifications for an upcoming project, and wasn't in the mood for interruptions. "Gail, I'm really busy right now. Can you handle it?" I snapped, a bit more harshly than intended, but she persisted, her voice light with amusement. "Jim, I think you'll want to see this visitor. It is Richard Beaumont." The laughter in her voice was unmistakable. Everyone in the office knew who Richard Beaumont was. I froze, then quickly stood and rushed out of my office. There he was, standing by Gail's desk, tall, slim, and with a full head of silver hair that made him look younger than his 70-something years. "Richard," I exclaimed, hugging him tightly, a lump forming in my throat. He hugged me back and chuckled, "Easy there, Jim. Let me breathe." I stepped back, still in shock. We had kept in touch, but this was the first time I'd seen him in nearly 20 years. I quickly ushered him into my office, and we sat down in the small seating area. It was surreal seeing him again. We caught up on each other's lives. I knew he had recently sold his company, but hearing it directly from him made it more real. He told me how he and Susan had moved to Naples a few weeks ago. They had talked about it for years, but finally acted on a whim, flying down, looking at properties, falling in love with a home on the Gulf, and buying it on the spot. Richard asked about my business and why I had decided not to sell. I explained my reasons, and he nodded in understanding. "Jim, you know you'll have to visit us now that we are practically neighbors. Susan would be really upset if you didn't." I promised I would, and we continued reminiscing. We talked about the early days of starting my company, how tough it was in the beginning, barely making ends meet until a couple of key breaks came through. Then I noticed a familiar twinkle in his eyes, and it hit me. My God, how could I have been so blind? It was Richard who had helped give my company the push it needed. I stumbled over my words, trying to express my gratitude. "Dante, be silly," he dismissed it with a wave. "All I did was call in a few favors. You took the ball and ran with it. Everyone saw the quality of your work. Your success is all due to your talent and hard work." I did very little. There was a lull in our conversation, and I could see him looking at me expectantly. I knew what he was waiting for, and I wanted to know, but I was also afraid. Asking about her might bring back more heartache, but I needed to know. Richard, how is Claire? Is she okay? Is she happy? I truly hope she's doing well, I said quietly, feeling a knot in my stomach. Richard sat back and let out a soft sigh. I've been waiting a long time for you to ask, Jim. Thank you for asking. Susan will be pleased you did. Now about Claire. He hesitated, collecting his thoughts. It's been a long time since you left, and a lot has happened to her. I braced myself, expecting to hear she had remarried and had a family. I didn't want to hear it, but I had to know. Jim, Richard continued, Claire lost the baby about a month after you left. It was a miscarriage, and the doctors said she wouldn't be able to conceive again. I'm not sure of all the details. It was a tough time for all of us. She had already quit her job at the publishing company. The miscarriage and the aftermath left her clinically depressed. And Jim, it wasn't your fault. Don T, start blaming yourself. What happened to Claire was her own doing, and she knew that. Her decisions led to her own downfall. I was stunned. This was all new information, and it shook me deeply. Claire had miscarried and couldn't have children. I felt a mix of emotions, sadness, confusion, and an old familiar ache. Richard continued, in a strange way, what happened changed her. She became more mature, responsible, and compassionate. She went through months of therapy and finally came out stronger. She decided to go back to school to study medicine of all things. We were shocked, but she was determined. She enrolled in medical school at Penn and eventually specialized in pediatric oncology. She said if she couldn't have children of her own, she wanted to help others. Richard paused, watching my reaction. I didn't know what to say. Claire had always loved her job in publishing. It was hard to imagine her leaving it, especially under such circumstances. Losing the baby must have been devastating, but I found it hard to feel sympathy given the context. The rest of Richard S.'s story stunned me even more. She had become a doctor and specialized in treating children with cancer. This wasn't the Claire I remembered, and yet it was. I felt overwhelmed by the transformation she had undergone. Do you know why we moved to Florida, Jim? Richard asked, breaking the silence. The biggest reason was to be closer to Claire. We wanted to be near our daughter. I looked at him blankly, trying to process everything. Near her? What? I stammered, feeling like an idiot. I was overloaded with information. Claire is here, Jim, Richard said gently. She accepted the position as chief of pediatric oncology at the cancer center at the university in Tampa. She's been there for a couple of months now. Jim, would you like to see her? Maybe say hello? No pressure, but I think it might be good for both of you. He hesitated. Don't worry, she doesn't know I am here. She'd probably be upset if she knew I suggested it, but she does know you are in Tampa. Do you think that influenced her decision? Richard teased, a twinkle in his eyes. All kidding aside, she would have taken the job because it is what she wanted, but knowing you were here did give her pause. It's not that she didn't want to see you, she just didn't want to complicate your life. I shook my head, trying to process everything Richard was telling me. It was overwhelming. I needed time to sort it all out. Richard noticed my confusion and stood up. Okay, Jim, I know I just dropped a lot on you. Take your time to think it over. I'll be in touch. I managed to stand and walk him to the door, watching as he left down the hall. Returning to my desk, I asked Gail to make sure I wasn't disturbed. I had a lot to think about. Claire. Claire is actually here in Tampa. My pulse quickened. I knew the questions I had to ask myself. What did I feel for Claire? Did I still love her? These were questions I had avoided for years, but now they demanded answers. I wasn't going to lie to myself. I knew I loved Claire, but that was the Claire I married. What did I feel for this new Claire, now a doctor in her mid-40s? I knew I had to see her, meet her, speak with her. Richard and I kept in touch, and I visited him and Susan in Naples. I was relieved, yet disappointed that Claire wasn't there. I wanted to see her, but was afraid of what I might feel or not feel. One Saturday, Susan called and invited me down for the day. It was sunny and hot, and I had a few bathing suits there. I packed a clean shirt and drove down to 75. Letting myself in, I called out their names. In the large sunroom at the back, I saw Claire standing by the sliding glass doors. My breath caught in my throat. She was about 20 feet away, silhouetted by the sunlight, but I knew it was her. Memories rushed back. She hadn't changed much, still trim and poised. I walked over and we stood gazing at each other. "Claire," I said softly. "Hello, Jim." "It's good to see you," she replied, extending a hand. I took it, and we shook hands as if meeting for the first time. In a sense, we were. "Jim," Claire continued, "we didn't mean to surprise you by my being here today. I begged my parents to let me come. I really wanted to see you. I hope you're not angry with me or them." "No, no, of course not," I reassured her. "It's nice to see you again, and Claire, you look lovely," I added impulsively. I was oddly pleased to see her blush and smile. We moved into the sunroom and sat on a white wicker set around a low, glass-topped coffee table. Our conversation started awkwardly, with long pauses, but soon we both chuckled at the awkwardness and relaxed. The conversation began to flow more naturally. Claire told me about her career in pediatric oncology, and I shared what I had been doing over the past years. She already knew about Mary, thanks to Richard and Susan. My mind operated on two levels consciously. I engaged in the conversation, mundane as it was, while on another level, I observed Claire, trying to understand the person she had become. Despite the years, she still looked great. She wore a casual cotton polo and khaki shorts, showing off her tanned legs. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, and there were faint lines at the corners of her eyes and mouth. She looked fantastic, but her eyes were different. There was a calm, mature confidence and tranquility that I had never seen before. This was a self-assured, highly skilled professional, comfortable in her own skin. This wasn't the Claire I had courted and married, nor the Claire I had divorced. This was a whole new woman, and I realized I wanted to get to know her. We spent the day talking, having lunch she had prepared, and lounging by the pool. I felt myself warming to her on different levels. I was attracted to her for the same reasons I had been when we were young, but now she was so much more. It was almost dusk when I noticed the time. "Claire, would you like to have dinner with me?" I asked hopefully. She smiled. "Jim, I would love to, but I have to be at the center tonight. Can we make it tomorrow?" We agreed, and we've been dating for the past 2 weeks. Is dating the right word? I knew I loved Claire. I guess I always have. And now I love the woman she has become even more. Does she feel the same way about me? We haven't discussed such intimate subjects, yet we're just getting to know each other again. The only physical contact we've had are soft kisses to end the evening. Where will this lead? I really don't know, but I'm eager to find out.